He never touched me, not once. And yet, when I dream of danger, it's always his voice I hear first. The memory of him doesn't smell like cologne or sweat or skin on skin. It smells like saffron, like red wine decanted for hours, like a sweet that costs more per night than I made in a month. It smells like silence, somehow. And silence is never empty. It's just crowded with what no one's brave enough to say. 7 years ago, I was the kind of girl who gave a price for her time and a fake name for her smile. The agency called it elite companionship. I called it survival. And that night, when the request came through, I remember thinking it sounded too easy. Dinner only, no touching, come dressed for conversation. That was all it said. I assumed loneliness, or a man with a fetish for control. Either way, I didn't care. Not then. I was good at being what people paid for. A mirror, a fantasy, a joke with legs and long lashes. I wore a dress the color of regret, tight enough to imply, but soft enough to suggest restraint. I showed up at the Park Chancellor Hotel at precisely 7:45 p.m. and was escorted to the rooftop dining room. I still remember the way the maitre d' smiled when he saw who I was meeting. I should have turned around. He was already seated when I arrived. Crisp suit, no tie, cufflinks like polished obsidian, salt and pepper hair, but the kind that made him look carved from something older, more dangerous. He stood as I approached, gentle, civilized. He pulled out my chair. Not like a man who wanted to impress me, like a man who'd done this 100 times before. "Call me Alexander," he said. "That's all. No last name, no title, just a name, like a secret whispered too close." I smiled. "You can call me Scarlet." He looked at me a moment too long. "I doubt that's your name," he said, sipping his wine, "but I respect the lie. It should have unnerved me. Instead, I felt seen, and that's always more dangerous than being touched." He didn't ask about my rates. He didn't make a move. He barely looked at my cleavage, and believe me, that neckline was engineered to make men forget their own names. Instead, he asked strange questions, ones no one else ever had. What would you be doing right now if you weren't here? When you lie, do you know it's a lie? What's the first thing you ever regretted? He didn't want answers, not really. He wanted to see how I thought. I gave him the version of myself I thought he wanted. Clever, flirtatious, unbothered. But somewhere around the third course, duck confit and a wine I couldn't pronounce, I started to feel the edges of that mask fraying. He didn't laugh at my jokes. He didn't flirt back. But he listened, really listened, as if he were waiting for me to run out of lies so he could finally hear the truth in the silence that followed. He walked me out of the hotel himself, declined the offer to take me upstairs, held the door of the town car open for me and said, "You're not what you pretend to be. That's the only reason I'll see you again." And he did, 3 more times. Same hotel, same conditions, dinner only, no touching, questions like knives. The last time he asked me if I believed in ghosts. I laughed. "Only the kind that pay well." He didn't smile, just looked out over the city skyline and said, "I think we haunt each other. Not after we die. After we leave." I never saw him again. No goodbye, no cancellation, no explanation. Just gone. And for a while, that was fine, easy to compartmentalize. I locked him away in the part of my mind where all the things I didn't want to feel lived. I moved cities, changed names, found a man who wanted the version of me I'd finally become, the woman with a real job, a modest apartment, a life she could tell her mother about without shame. Then last week he brought me home to meet his family, and when I stepped through the door I saw him. Alexander, same face, Same calm voice, older now, but not diminished. If anything, he'd grown sharper with time. He didn't flinch, just smiled when he saw me, like I was an echo he expected to hear again eventually. I couldn't breathe. My fiancé wrapped his arm around me. "Dad, this is Elle. Elle, this is my father." I shook his hand. His grip was warm, precise. He didn't say anything that night. Not a word about our past. Just watched me across the table while his son told stories about us. How we met, how he proposed, how excited he was for the wedding. But Alexander's eyes never left mine. And after dessert, when the others were clearing plates and I stood in the hallway wondering if I was hallucinating the entire evening, he stepped up behind me and whispered, "I know who you are, and I know who you were. If you hurt my son, I'll remind you who I am." Then he smiled again. That same gentle, lethal smile from 7 years ago, and walked away. He never touched me, but I still feel him on my skin. In the silence of 3 a.m. phone rings, I don't answer. In the questions I no longer ask my fiancé, because I'm afraid the answers will sound like Alexander's voice. In the mirror, when I catch my own eyes and wonder who exactly is pretending now. He never touched me, but I'm still haunted, and I don't know what I'm more afraid of, that he'll destroy me, or that part of me wants him to. I used to think the worst clients were the talkers, men who rattled on about their wives, their conquests, their bank accounts, men who didn't want company, just confirmation that they were still powerful, still wanted, still something more than their thinning hair and mortgage payments. You learn to smile on cue, to laugh at their mediocre jokes and fake a shiver when they say your name like it matters. But Alexander never talked that way. He listened. And listening, I've come to realize, is far more dangerous than speaking. Talking is about ego. Listening is about control. I still remember the first dinner clearly, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. He never asked me where I was from, never asked what I charged, how long I'd been doing it, or who else I saw. Most men want to know how they compare, whether they're your best, your richest, your biggest tipper. Alexander didn't care who I was for anyone else. He only wanted to know who I was when I wasn't pretending. "Do you lie because you have to?" he asked once, cutting into his steak. "Or because you like it?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Is that a serious question?" He raised an eyebrow. "Is that a serious answer?" I laughed then, a nervous little sound that didn't match the dress I was wearing. "What do you think?" "I think you lie for the same reason I dine alone," he said. "It keeps people from getting close enough to ruin the fantasy." I should have walked out that night, but instead, I stayed. Stayed and found myself answering him. "I lie," I said, "because it's safer than the truth." He nodded like he already knew that, like he knew everything. The second dinner was worse, not because he touched me. Again, he didn't, but because I wanted him to ask. I wanted the rules to break, just once, for the edge of his hand to brush my knee, for him to lean in a little too close, to forget for just 1 second that this was all pretend. He didn't. Instead, he asked me what I dreamed about. "When you sleep," he said, "do you dream as Scarlett, or the woman you used to be?" I flinched, covered it with a sip of wine. "I don't dream," I said. He looked at me for a long time, then shook his head, smiling faintly. "Everyone dreams, especially liars." That was the thing with Alexander. He didn't need to undress me to make me feel naked. He peeled me open with language, with long silences and soft questions that lingered in the air like perfume. Sweet at first, but cloying once you realized you couldn't get rid of it. The third dinner was the one that undid me. It was raining that night. I remember because I came in soaked, my coat clinging to my arms like a second skin. I was late, which never happened. And when I saw him already seated, wine poured, eyes fixed on the doorway like he knew the exact second I'd appear, something inside me twisted. He stood when I approached, handed me a cloth napkin like it was something intimate, sacred, almost. "You're late," he said. "I was caught in traffic. You weren't sure you wanted to come." I paused. "Is that another one of your insights?" "No," he said. "Just a guess." We sat, ordered, ate, and then, as I was tracing the rim of my glass with one fingertip, watching him, he said, "Do you ever miss the version of yourself who didn't do this?" There was no accusation in his tone, just inquiry, like a philosopher wondering if the sun knew it burned. "And God help me," I answered. "I don't miss her," I said. "I miss not knowing why she had to become me." He exhaled, like the answer mattered to him. Then asked the question I still hear, sometimes, in the space between sleep and memory. "And if you could be someone else again, would you?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say anything that would make his eyes stop doing that thing, that unblinking thing where it felt like he was memorizing every word for a day far in the future when he'd remind me I said it. Instead, I lied. "No," I whispered, but he didn't correct me this time. Just nodded, finished his drink, and walked me out into the night. He was gone after that. No call, no message, no booking, just absence, as sharp as his presence had been, and I told myself it was for the best. But that didn't stop me from checking the agency roster for months afterward, from scanning hotel lobbies for a familiar shape, from dreaming, yes, dreaming, of a man who never touched me but took something anyway. And now he's back, wearing the face of my future's past, my fiancé's father, the man I have to pretend not to know while seated across linen-covered tables as we discuss cake flavors and guest lists. He hasn't spoken again since that night in the hallway, but I feel him everywhere. At breakfast, when I laugh a little too hard at his son's jokes, and I catch Alexander's gaze across the table. Flat, amused. In the car, when my fiancé asks if I'm nervous about the wedding, and I feel my throat tighten before I answer. And in bed, when I lie awake beside a man I genuinely love, wondering what it says about me that the only person who ever truly saw me was the one who never touched me. It wasn't the last dinner that ruined me. It was the silence after. Some men leave claw marks or bruises or lipstick stains. Alexander left a nothing so precise it felt surgical. No message, no cancellation, no explanation, just nothing. At first, I assumed it was an error, a scheduling mix-up. Maybe he'd left town, business trip, death in the family. That was the sensible thing to believe, so I clung to it like a life raft, because anything was better than believing I'd been discarded. Even now, I feel pathetic admitting that, because it wasn't love, it wasn't romance. It was 3 dinners and a shared silence. No hands, no kisses, just words like poison and wine. But something about the way he looked at me, not with hunger, but with interest, had carved itself under my skin. Most men wanted the fantasy. Alexander wanted the flaw, and then he was gone. I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. But something in me hardened. A door I hadn't realized was still ajar, quietly clicking shut. After a week, I stopped checking the agency logs. After 2, I stopped checking my phone. After 3, I left the city, abbing key, but something sighed a room. I told myself I was retiring, starting over. I changed my name, cut my hair, bought books I wouldn't read, and planted flowers I'd never water. I took a job I was overqualified for and wore cardigans instead of silk. I started collecting receipts, saving for things like curtains and electric kettles. I pretended these were signs of progress, and they were, for a while, until I met Daniel. He was kind, gentle, the sort of man who apologized when he interrupted, who thanked baristas by name, who liked trivia nights and Sunday markets. He never made me feel watched, and maybe that was the appeal. With Daniel, I could be soft again. He didn't know the word escort. He only knew I worked in events. He never asked what kind, never pushed. I think he thought it was corporate. There were nights I considered telling him the truth, but there was always a dinner, a movie, a moment that made it too easy to keep lying. And then, 2 years in, he proposed. A quiet evening. Pasta, wine. A ring slid across the table on a dessert plate, nestled between strawberries and regret. I said yes, because I meant it, because I wanted to believe a future built on something kind could outrun a past built on survival. Because I didn't know that ghosts can smile across a dinner table and wear the name Dad. He didn't say my name at the introduction, just nodded slightly, one eyebrow raised. I shook his hand like I was meeting him for the first time. This is my father, Alexander. L, a name I gave myself after I left. A name that felt clean, unburned, untouched. Alexander let his eyes rest on me just a beat too long, but not in recognition. In possession. He didn't need to say anything. I could already hear what he was thinking. So this is who you became when I disappeared. Dinner was torturous. Not because he said anything. He didn't. But because silence has its own gravity, and his was black hole strong. Every glance felt like a footnote to something unsaid. Every toast felt like a challenge. Every smile had a razor edge. I sat across from him and tried not to remember the way he'd looked at me once. Not like prey, but like a puzzle. Like I was something to be solved, not consumed. I had lived whole years since then. I had loved. I had changed. But in that moment, watching him sip wine and nod while Daniel talked about wedding venues, I felt 14 again, waiting for a father figure to disappoint me. Or maybe something worse. Later, when I slipped away to catch my breath, he followed. Of course he did. He didn't touch me, just stepped close. Close enough to remind me of what had never happened. I know who you are, he whispered, and I know who you were. His voice was softer than I remembered, not threatening, not angry, just sure. If you hurt my son, he said, leaning in, I'll remind you who I am. Then he smiled, that same serene, unreadable smile, the one he gave the maitre d' at the park chancellor, the one he gave me after asking what I dreamed about when I wasn't lying, and then he walked away. What does a threat sound like when it's not a threat? When it's just a man reminding you that memory is a kind of ownership? He vanished once, and in doing so, carved out a hollow in me I filled with new names, new routines, new love. But now he's back. Not as a lover, not as a client, as a father, and suddenly the future feels less like a road and more like a trap. I didn't tell Daniel. Of course not. What would I say? Your father used to pay me to eat duck confit and lie to him about who I wasn't. He asked me questions that felt like being undressed. He once looked at me like he wanted to ruin me, and I let him. No. I smiled through brunch. I offered to help with the wedding invitations. I complimented the wine. I told myself it was a coincidence, that there are dozens of men named Alexander, with sharp eyes and soft voices and a taste for destruction. But in my bones, I know better. He didn't just disappear. He retreated, waited, watched, hid, dunged. And now, somehow, the man I'm supposed to build my life with is the son of the only man who ever made me forget who I was and remember it all at once. I go to bed next to Daniel and try not to wonder if Alexander ever asked him those same kinds of questions growing up. Do you lie often? What do you dream about when no one is watching? Who would you be if you could burn your life to the ground and walk away? Daniel would never have the answers, but I do. And Alexander knows it. The first time Daniel ever described his father to me, it was in the form of a warning disguised as affection. "He's hard to read," he said, spooning sugar into his coffee. "Quiet, but not cold, just measured." Measured. The word stuck with me. At the time, I thought it meant composed. Elegant. The kind of man who takes his scotch neat and gives firm handshakes. But now I realize measured meant something else. It meant dangerous. Dangerous, like a scale that always tips in his favor, like a silence that listens more than it forgives. I don't know why I thought I could escape him. Maybe I believed he'd forgotten me. Maybe I believed I'd forgotten him. But now, sitting at the edge of Daniel's childhood home, where the air smells like lavender and legacy, where his mother's portrait still hangs in the hallway like a benediction, I feel like a lyre made of porcelain, waiting to crack. I wonder what Alexander sees when he looks at me now. A threat? A fraud? Or something worse? Something he misses? He hasn't spoken to me again, not since the hallway. Not since the whisper that felt like both a promise and a prayer. But he watches, subtly, precisely, like I'm a memory he's cataloging all over again. At dinner, he sits across from us, answering questions about work and politics and the wine he brought back from Italy, all the while never quite taking his eyes off me. Daniel doesn't notice. Of course he doesn't. Daniel is everything his father is not. Open, eager, uncomplicated. He believes in the version of me I've built, Elle, the woman who loves lemon tea and indie novels and obscure documentaries. The woman who never flinches when someone says the word escort, because why would it ever come up? But Alexander knows not just what I was, he knows what I felt, what I still feel, if I'm being honest. Not love, not lust, something older, stranger, recognition. The first time he asked me a question I couldn't answer, it wasn't one of those strange little riddles he liked to whisper over wine. It was this. Do you ever wonder what version of yourself they fall in love with? He meant the clients, of course, the men. But now I think about that question every time Daniel touches my cheek, or reads me a line from a book he knows I'll like, or calls me baby in that soft, sleepy voice right before we fall asleep. Which version does he love? The one he sees, or the one that was taught to become what people want? Sometimes I'm not sure there's a difference. Tonight, we're having dinner again, just the three of us. Daniel invited his father to the apartment. "So, you two can get to know each other," he said, as if we didn't already. I spend an hour choosing a dress that doesn't look like it was bought with someone else's money. Not too tight, not too plain. Something in between, like me. Alexander arrives precisely on time. Of course he does. He brings wine, compliments the apartment, hugs his son, and when Daniel excuses himself to take a work call, Alexander and I are left alone in the kitchen. The silence between us stretches, not tense, not warm, just aware. He reaches for a glass from the cabinet without asking, like he's done it 1,000 times. "You look different," he says. Not kindly, not unkindly, just stating a fact. "So do you," I answer. He nods, then turns to face me. "Why him?" The question lands like a coin dropped into water. Small, still. But the ripples stretch out forever. I could lie, tell him about Daniel's kindness, his patience, his laughter, and it would all be true. But I know what he's really asking. He's not asking why I love Daniel. He's asking why I'm willing to love someone safe, because he doesn't make me feel like I'm being watched when I breathe, I say softly. Alexander's eyes flicker. "Just for a second. He'll never know who you are," he says. "I hope not." And if he does, I don't answer. Because I've already had that dream, the one where Daniel finds out, not just about the agency, but about Alexander, about us, the dinners, the questions, the ghost of a woman he never met, living inside the woman he's about to marry. "He loves the person I've become," I say. Alexander steps closer. Not enough to touch. Just enough to remind me he could. "That's the thing about becoming someone new," he murmurs. "You still have to carry the corpse of who you were." He says it like a fact, not a threat, not even a warning, just a truth. And the worst part is, I agree. Later that night, after he's gone and Daniel's curled up behind me, fingers light against my hip, I lie awake and think about the word corpse. The woman I was, Scarlet, the one who wore desire like armor. She's not dead. She's just resting, waiting, somewhere deep inside me, still whispering truths I don't want to hear. She's the one who noticed how Alexander looked at me when he left, not like a man saying goodbye, like a man saying soon. The hallway was too narrow for both of us, but he didn't move. He never moved first. The walls were lined with framed photographs. Daniel as a toddler, Daniel at graduation, Daniel on a ski slope I'd never been to. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I couldn't recall ever being in a space so intimate and yet so exposed. A family's life carved into drywall. And me, standing inside it, a trespasser wearing borrowed grace. I hadn't meant to be alone. Daniel had gone to find the cake, some caramel thing his father liked, and I had excused myself to wash my hands. That's all it was meant to be. But when I stepped out of the bathroom, Alexander was already waiting, blocking the hallway, leaning against the wall like he had all the time in the world, and none of it was mine. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked. And somehow, that was worse. His eyes scanned my face like he was flipping pages, waiting for the lie to reveal itself. And when he spoke, it wasn't a sentence. It was a scalpel. "You're too good at this." I blinked. At what? Pretending, blending, becoming. The word becoming caught in my chest like a swallowed pin. I laughed. Small, hollow. "It's been years." He nodded, slow. "Doesn't change what's underneath." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that Elle was real, that she'd earned her place in the world, her clean sheets, her stable job, her man who loved her without suspicion. But I couldn't say it, because Alexander wasn't just a reminder of my past. He was the only person who had ever looked at me without needing proof of who I was trying to be. He hadn't wanted Scarlett, the girl who sold performance, and he didn't want Elle, the girl who buried her old life under scented candles and white blouses. He wanted the woman in between, the woman even I didn't fully recognize. "What do you want from me?" I asked, finally. He tilted his head. "Nothing. That's the problem." That stopped me. What do you mean? If I wanted revenge, I'd ruin you. If I wanted redemption, I'd leave you alone. But I don't want either. I just wanted to see what kind of story you'd tell him. He stepped forward then, just one step, enough to close the air between us like a secret. He never touched me. Not then, not ever, but I felt him, like pressure. He doesn't know what you are. And what is that, exactly? His smile was slight, empty, haunted. I swallowed. Hard. You think I'm going to hurt him? No, he said. I think you already have. You just haven't decided how deep the wound should go. He let the silence stretch after that. He was good at that, leaving the weight of a sentence behind, like perfume in the air, making you carry it because he wouldn't. And then, just as I opened my mouth to ask him why he disappeared, why he'd left me all those years ago without a word or a trace, he leaned in. His breath was warm against my cheek. You want to know why I stopped seeing you? I nodded before I could stop myself. He didn't flinch. Because I liked you more than I wanted to. There it was. Not a confession. Not a regret. Just an acknowledgement. Something bone deep and blood warm and terrifying in its honesty. And I knew, he added, that if I touched you, I wouldn't stop. When he pulled away, I was shaking. Not visibly, not in that fragile, weepy way women are taught to tremble. No, this was the kind of shaking that happens beneath the skin, tectonic, private, like a scream you swallow until your throat forgets how to hold sound. And then I heard Daniel's voice from the kitchen. Elle, you okay back there? I tried to speak. My mouth opened. Nothing came. Alexander stepped back. Finally, you should go, he said. He's waiting. And just like that, he vanished again. That night, in bed, Daniel reached for me. It wasn't urgent. It never was with him. He was always gentle, always soft. And as his hand skimmed my body like I was glass, clean, breakable, I kept thinking about how Alexander had never touched me. Not once. And yet his absence was the most intimate contact I had ever known. When Daniel asked if I was okay, I said yes. Because what else could I say? Your father made me into a ghost, and now I can't decide if I want to haunt you both or disappear entirely? No. I said yes. And in doing so, I realized something. Alexander hadn't ruined me. He hadn't threatened me. He hadn't even betrayed me. He had seen me once, briefly, brilliantly. And now, he was reminding me that the woman who once answered his impossible questions was still alive somewhere, buried under white lies and wedding invitations and borrowed identities, still breathing, still dangerous. The silence came back first. Not his voice, not his face, just the stillness, that long, heavy quiet I hadn't felt since the last dinner, the last question, the last time I let myself believe absence meant safety. After the hallway, he didn't speak to me again. He didn't need to. He'd already spoken the only words that mattered. If I touched you, I wouldn't stop. Now they lived in my bones like phantom heat, pulsing, undiminished, impossible to scrub out. The kind of memory you don't revisit so much as reside in. Daniel was planning the honeymoon. Santorini. Something soft and white and peaceful, he said. Something where time didn't matter. Something to mark the beginning of a life we could call our own. And I smiled and nodded and circled dates on the calendar with a pen that kept slipping in my hand. But every time the phone rang and I didn't recognize the number, I paused, held my breath, waited. It's not that I thought he'd do something. It's that I wasn't sure if I wanted him to. I kept wondering what would be worse, Alexander vanishing again, or not vanishing at all. A week passed, no calls. 2 weeks, no messages. 3, and then a letter. No return address, no name, just my name, L, in a familiar hand that made my stomach drop the second I saw it. Inside, nothing but a single sheet of cream stationery, typed, "You were right to pretend, but don't forget who you're pretending for." No signature, no date, just that, just enough. I burned the letter, but I memorized the words first, because they weren't a threat, they weren't a promise. They were a mirror. I hadn't forgotten who I was pretending for. Not Daniel, not Alexander, for myself, Elle, the woman who could belong here, who could be loved safely, kindly, without complication, who could cook on Sundays and make plans for baby names and send thank you notes with tidy cursive and no secrets between the lines. Scarlett was dead. I told myself that often, but ghosts don't die, they linger. And some nights, when Daniel sleeps beside me, warm, familiar, his breathing slow and soft, I stare at the ceiling and wonder what it would have felt like if Alexander had ever kissed me, not because I want it now, but because I never stopped wondering then. The sound of waiting isn't silence. It's the hum of a phone that doesn't ring. It's the rustle of paper beneath your fingertips when you check the mail and find nothing. It's your own voice whispering what-ifs into the dark long after you've sworn you've moved on. Daniel says he can't wait to see me walk down the aisle. I smile. Tell him I can't wait either. And most days, that feels true. But some nights I rehearse the exit, not because I'll take it, because I need to remember that I could. Alexander gave me no threats, no demands. He didn't blackmail me or seduce me or ruin me. He did something worse. He remembered me. He remembered a version of me I worked so hard to forget that I convinced even myself she was never real. But she was. And now, in the quiet hours of dawn, when Daniel shifts in his sleep and the world outside hasn't decided yet whether to be kind or cruel, I find myself listening. Not for footsteps, not for phone calls, for the sound of him, that particular stillness he always brought with him, like the air around him understood reverence. We're 3 weeks from the wedding. Daniel is drafting vows. He wants to write his own. He says it's important to speak the truth out loud. He asks me if I want to too. I hesitate, because what would I say? I promise to be the woman you see when you look at me, even if I don't always see her myself. I promise to love you the way safe harbors are loved, quietly, deeply, without question. I promise not to tell you that when I'm alone, I still think about the man who never touched me, but touched everything else. No, those aren't vows. They're confessions. And this isn't the time for confessions. This is the time for performance, for promises, for pretending, and I'm good at that. I've always been good at that. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the apartment, I look at our wedding invitations stacked on the counter. Ivory paper, gold trim, elegant, polite, sanitized. Not a trace of Scarlett in them. Not a trace of Alexander. And that's how I know I did it right. That's how I know I buried them both deep enough. And yet, every time I walk past a mirror, I glance sideways. Just to be sure, the woman looking back is still Elle, still intact, still pretending well enough that even the ghost inside her can't escape.